This mimer from
Recording
Tafshin
in
Ben
progress.
Zayin is a mimer on the Liddoidi, but interestingly, it is speaking about a juxtaposition between two different mamorim of the Alter Rebbe, two classic mamorim of the Alter Rebbe on Ani Liddoidi. The first mimer of the Alter Rebbe on Ani Liddoidi is more well known, more common. It's the famous mimer that speaks about Melech Basada, and the second mimer following that in Likutei Torah is quite well known also, but it's not quoted as often, it's not brought down as often. That's Anila Doidi Li Haroya B'Shoshanim. And the Rebbe in this Maimer is going to, in most of the Mamarim, the Rebbe will either speak about one or two of these Mamarim. In this case, the Rebbe will talk about the overview and the comparison of these two Mamarim and why the second mimer follows the first, etc. So let's begin. It says, Anil לדודי ודודי לי, I am to my beloved, it says in Shir Hashirim, and my beloved is to me. Hine b'Likutei Torah yeshnei drushim b'aschala zu. In Likutei Torah there are two mamorim. The term that the Rebbe uses for mamorim in the mamorim is called drushim. There are two mamorim that begin with Anil לדודי. Harishon maskal Anil לדודי ודודי li Rosh Tevis El. The first one begins, that the whole entire title is this sentence. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. That's the acronym of the month of El. And he explains what's the content of the matter of El, what's El about. It's like the metaphor of a king in the field. The second one begins with what it says, I am to my beloved, my beloved is to me, the one who is grazing and going out to pasture amongst the roses, which is a fuller quote of the pasuk of Ani Liddoidi v'Doidi li, and that is the title of the mimer. It doesn't say Rosh Tevis El, it doesn't just say Ani Liddoidi v'Doidi li alone, but it focuses a lot on the idea of the connection between that, Ani Liddoidi v'Doidi li, and the idea of roses. What's the concept of a Shoshana? In the second mimer, the Alter Rebbe explains, similar to the first mimer, Inyan Ha'aris Yud Gimel Sarach B'Shabachayil Shel, the idea of the ray of the 13 attributes of mercy that shine in the month of El, which is also what the Alter Rebbe explains in the first mimer, except in the first mimer to explain how can it be shining in the month of Elul and it's a weekday? How is it possible to have such a high revelation and still be considered a weekday? So for that he explains the whole mashal of Melech Basad. That mashal of the king in the field he doesn't go into in the second mimer, though he does speak about the 13 attributes of mercy. So then he says, and he connects the 13 attributes that are made in the month of El with the second part of the pasuk that he brings. And he explains, that's what it means that he goes to pasture and to graze amongst the roses. Just like a rose has 13 petals, so too there's the 13 attributes of mercy. So that's the connection, according to the Alter Rebbe, in the second mimer between the first part of the pasuk, Ani Liddoidi v'Doidi li, which Ani Liddoidi v'Doidi li is Rosh Tevis El, with the second part of the pasuk, I'm sorry, not the first part of the mimer, the first part of the pasuk, the second part of the pasuk, the one that graze amongst the roses. A rose has 13 petals, and therefore it's the month of El is the time of revelation of the 13 attributes. That's why we have the idea that we are considered grazing and going to pasture amongst the roses. Then the Alter Rebbe also adds and explains at length, the Rebbe emphasizes, that another hint, another thing that the roses are or the number 13, which is the number of petals of roses, indicate. And not only does it indicate the idea of the 13 attributes of mercy, but also Shukineged Yud Gimel Midas Shatar Nidresh. It corresponds to the 13 principles of hermeneutics, I think that's the way it's pronounced. The 13 midas that we say, Amar Rabbi Shmuel, every single morning, we say this before Haidu, that enumerates 13 ways how we derive halachas from the Torah, whether it's Kal V'chomer, Gzeirah Shava, etc., etc. So this indicates what's the number 13 have to do with this idea that we're talking about now. It has to do with Torah study. Shizel in Shoshanim, it's also hinted in the word Shoshanim, not just because a rose has 13 petals, but also al tikra Shoshanim ela Shoshonim b'halachas. The Chazal say, do not read it as Shoshanim, which means roses. It's actually, but read it as Shoshonim, because in the Torah the nekudas aren't there, so you can switch around the nekudas. So instead of reading it the roses in the plural, but you could read it that are studying. Shoshonim from the word shoina halachas, someone that studies halachas, which means that this pasuk about Haroya b'Shoshanim is indicating that the month of Anila Doidi Vododi is talking about the idea of Limud Torah, the idea of the special emphasis of studying Torah. Yet, despite that idea that it has a common denominator with the first mimer that we spoke about before, about Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, the 13 attributes of mercy, Omnam, yet Bedrush Zemashmit Prote Anim Shulam Al Basada, the second mimer, the Alter Rebbe, it leaves out the details of the metaphor of a king in the field. So now the Rebbe is going to analyze the connection and the reason for the order of these two mamorim. We can explain the continuation, this series of mamorim. This is like saying something in general, and then saying something in detail. You give out the principle, then or the idea and the point, and then you break it down into the details. In the first mimer, it's explained the rule, the principle, nekudas in Yonishal El, the point of what El is about. Mashla Melch Besada, it's analogous to the king in the field. And the second mimer is explained the specifics of the avodah. So in other words, the idea of the king in the field is just a general overview of what El is about. But now that the king is in the field, okay, the king is here with us. The 13 attributes of mercy shine. Everything that happens in the spiritual needs to have an impact and an effect and a correspondence what I have to do down here. What is it down here that's demanded and necessary for me to do? So he says that in the second mimer explained the details of the avodah. One of the details that it includes is also Torah study. This idea that we go from a general to a specific, that's in all the matters of Torah, we approach Torah in that type of way. First, when we study a matter in Torah, they're in the way of a point. And afterwards, they come down into details. So, he's going to give an example of where we find this in Torah itself, in the very Torah that we're studying, that the way the Torah was given was in the way of a klal and then a prat. The an example from this is from the Aser Sadibris. Kol Torah Kula, and them is included the entire Torah. K'maimer Azal the Chazal say al pasuk, and the pasuk where it says about the wording were engraved on the luchos. It says mizeh u'mizeh ksuvim. They are written from here and from here. The simple meaning of that statement is that they were written. You could read the luchos from both sides. Chazal even bring down more. You could read it from all four sides, whatever. But on that pasuk, the Chazal also darshan shekol in yoni Torah, that all matters of Torah, even what a diligent student will eventually come to say something new, a new insight. They were all included in the Aser Sadibris. Yes, came even more so. The Ten Commandments itself. All the Ten Commandments, all the Aser Sadibris are included in Hanoich Havai Lekecha Asher Tzich Meretz Mitzrayim. Even going even further, even deeper. Even the first utterance, not the first utterance, the first mitzvah, the first statement, it's all included in the first word of Asar Dibros Anoichi. In Anoichi is included the first dibur. How do we know that it's included the first dibur, and therefore by extension the Asar Dibros, and by extension also the rest of the Torah? So it says 4 lines in the bottom, like it's also understood from the Chazal said, Anoichi Rosh Tevis Anon Nafshi Kosvis Yehavis. The Chazal, as the Rebbe also discusses in Chassidus, in Sichos, why did they specifically choose the word Anoichi to begin the Asar Hadibros? First of all, a more common word would be Ani. The Rebbe talks about Anoichi is taken from Egyptian. It's an Egyptian word. So the Chazal say Anoichi is a Rosh Tevis. It's an acronym for I wrote myself into the Torah, and I gave the Torah over, meaning I gave myself over in the Torah that I wrote myself into. What is that? It's not just the word Anoichi, even though that's the Rosh Tevis, the word Anoichi. It's not that David wrote himself over just into the word Anoichi. But the word Anoichi encapsulates the Koyal Kol Torah Kula. It's referring to the entire Torah. All of it is included on Anoichi because all of it follows that idea that Hashem wrote himself into the Torah and gave himself through the Torah to us. So therefore the word Anoichi includes the first Dibur and the Sersa Dibris and the entire Torah. The Rebbe brings down often where it says in Shar Yichud V'Emunah that the reason why Rosh Tevis B'chlal are significant. Why do we make a big deal when we put together a word from the first letters, let's say a phrase, Ani לדודי ודודי לי? What's the significance of it? It's not just a play. The idea is because the first letter of a word always includes the rest of it. And the same thing, the first word in a statement includes the rest of it, etc., etc. So therefore, Anoichi being the first word in Asar Dibros includes the entire sentence in the entire first dibur, and therefore the entire Asar Dibros, and therefore the entire Torah Kula. So now the Rebbe adds even more so about this idea about how Anoichi, up till now, the Rebbe worked his way up from the Torah to the Asar Dibros, the Asar Dibros in the first dibur, and the first dibur in the word Anoichi. Now the Rebbe is going to go to the first letter. We could add to this 2 lines in the bottom. It's known the reason why the beginning of Torah is specifically with the letter Beis from the word Bereshis. Why does Bereshis begin with a letter Beis? Mishum Rosh Tevis Bracha, because the Rosh Tevis of the word Bracha. So we see the significance of the Beis, the first letter. According to this, we could say the way the Torah begins with the letter Beis, which stands for Bracha, as opposed to what we just now said. We said that Aleph is like, or Anoichi includes the whole Torah. So it's like, which is it? The Beis of Bereshis, the Anoichi, or even the Aleph of Anoichi? So it says like this. It depends what aspect of Torah we are talking about, what level, what idea of Torah. It says, according to this, we could say the Zeu Kifi Shah Torah Hi Ba'ofen Shel. Next page, Hamshach Shalachein Tchilasa Bebeis. Torah, the way it's already being drawn down. Beis is about drawing down because Beis stands for the word Baracha. Baracha is, as we know, always from the word Hamshacha, that it's something that comes down from above to below. So when you have the idea of the Ois Beis as the beginning of Torah, as the klal for all the pratim of Torah, that's Torah the way it's already coming down. Just like what it's about over there at the beginning of Torah, it's talking about the creation of the world. That's talking about Torah the way it has to do with the world. top of 291, Mashenki Fish Nichlalos Bois Addition Dasar Sadibres, as opposed to where the entire Torah is part of the klal of Aser Sadibres, so it's not the same way as the entire Torah is included in the letter Beis at the beginning. Hareza Ois Aleph Dafke, it's specifically the letter Aleph. Why is it specifically the letter Aleph? Because the emphasis over here with the letter Aleph is not about how it comes down into the world, which is the concept of Baracha, but rather, though the Aser Sadibris is also about coming down, because that's the word Yehavis, the last Yud of Anoichi, means I've given. That is the Torah, the way it comes down. But still in all, but what is being given? What is coming down? But what is coming down is, in this Hamshacha, is what Hashem says, myself, nafshi, myself, I wrote into the Torah and I gave. Via Seder Mizun, even more so, Ana. It's Ana nafshi, I wrote myself into the Torah. So in other words, to put it in simpler words, the base of Bereshis indicates the way the entire Torah is about the Hamshach in the world. But that's already Torah the way it relates to the world. That's already a lower level of Torah. The Aleph of the Aser Sadibris, or the Anoichi of Aser Sadibris, is about the level of Torah, the way it relates to Hashem's very essence, to the level of Ana. True that Hashem transmitted to us, but it's not, the emphasis is not on the transmission, but the level that's coming down, as opposed to the base of Bereshis. But all of this is really just being brought as an example that the whole idea of Torah was given in a way of a klal to prat. You have the klal of the Aleph, and then you have the Anoichi, and then breaks down to the first Dibur, and then from that it comes down to the Aser Sadibris, and then it comes down to the entire Torah until Mashat Talmud Vosik Osed L'Chadash. So just like it's that way in Torah in general, so to the Rebbe is going to explain, it's in these two Mamorim, the first Maimer Vanil Doidi Rosh Tevis El, and the second Maimer entitled Nil Doidi V'Doidi Li Haroy B'Shoshan. He says in the second paragraph, so too we could say an explanation of the order of these two Mamar. In the first Maimer, it's explained the matter in one point. The point is the king is in the field. It's a very general idea. That's the revelation of the month of El. So the Rebbe is going to go on and say, yes, it is a very general point, but we're going to come down in that mashal itself. We're going to come down to a lot of details. Still in all, it doesn't take away from the fact that it's still a general point. So the Rebbe says in the second line, the second paragraph, we could add
incoming voice call from
that the Shums and Namral Zem Mashal Gashmi. For this reason, it says a physical mashal davkim melech ubnei ha'ir hayotzim l'krasi v'cholu, specifically with a physical metaphor of a king and the people of the city that go out to greet him. Mashal metachsa is chalkos, a mashal from an ultimate state of an ultimate level of division, because it gets into many details about how they go out and they follow him and he smiles to them, etc., etc. It doesn't just say, okay, it's like a king in the field, and the same way Yud Misarachim shines even into the weekdays. So he says that what's the idea that we have a general idea coming down into so many details? If it's general, then it shouldn't be details. So he says, as it's known, specifically in the ultimate state of division, that is where the non-defined and simple and pure essence comes out. It's explained in Teres Chaim Rebbe and Mamar Tzemach Tzedek, meaning that when you have something that's like at its essence, it's undefined, it will come down into a lot of details from that. For an example that it says concerning, let's say, candlelight. If you look at the actual flame, it's just a minor thing. It's not defined. You don't see details in it, but it will spread out into every corner of a dark room. It will expand everywhere and go to this side, to that side, to the other side. So we see that because it's not just despite, but actually because of its undefined essential state, that's why it will come down in such type of way of many details and so on. So therefore, the mashal will be first a pure, like essential mashal, but the mashal will contain many details. And then it comes down the way of details in this first mimer itself as well, that it comes from the general idea of the king in the field. You go into details, as we're saying, you go from the klal to the prat. Aval be'ikr b'maimer hasheni, but primarily the details are what come out in the second mimer. Through Torah study, in the manner of the 13 attributes that the Torah is derived from them. That's a revelation of the oral Torah in the way it was included in of the written Torah. In other words, how do we take the oral Torah out of the written Torah? That's through the 13 attributes. Until from through the 13 attributes that extracted the oral Torah from the written Torah, so then that manifests into action. So when we're talking about the 13 attributes, so really what we're talking about over here is bringing out something that is in a state of a klal in Torah Shebeksav. It's not just that the first mimer is a klal and the second mimer is a prat, but the very topic of the second mimer, which is about the 13 attributes, also talks about going from the klal of Torah Shebeksav through the 13 attributes. We take it out of that klal and we bring it down into the Torah Shebapeh. Until from this, like I just mentioned before, the klal comes on to even greater pratim, because it's not just something that's written down as a halach in Torah Shebapeh, but it actually manifests itself in doing action. The greatness of Torah study is that it brings to action. So therefore, that's the ultimate transition, and going from a klal to a prat, till the ultimate details is that when the details come down all the way down here below. In the next part, he's going to talk about another interesting thing. In the manner of study or teaching, you don't just have klal or prat, or a nekuda and a prat, but you also have a final nekuda. Like when you speak, you'll give first an overview of what you're going to talk about, then you speak about the details, then at the end, a conclusion, you sum it all up in one point. So that's the Rebbe is going to talk about in tomorrow's shir, that after we have the nekuda and the pratim, you have the nekuda or the klal at the end of the entire series of the two mamorim to bring them all together.